For 60 years, officials said this Rajasthan river was gone for good, its bed reduced to dust, its villages abandoned, its future sealed. Every expert report called recovery impossible, groundwater lost forever. Yet today, the river flows year-round, revived not by engineers, but by 72 villagers who built hundreds of ancient water harvesting johads, raising water tables by up to 15 meters. The government gave up, but these communities forged their own water parliament and rewrote the rules of survival. The result doesn't look real, so how did the people achieve what the experts declared hopeless? Official reports painted a bleak picture for the Arvari River and its villages. Engineers surveyed the landscape, studied the geology, and delivered their judgment. Groundwater levels had collapsed beyond recovery. Government documents listed Alwar district as a critical zone, wells marked dry, aquifers labeled overexploited. The language was clinical, but the meaning was clear. In state files, the river's watershed was written off as a lost cause. The verdict filtered down to the villages in the form of water trucks and ration deliveries. Local wells, once the lifeblood of the community, stood empty for years. Residents queued for hours, waiting for government tankers that sometimes never arrived. Farming shrank to a single crop each year, if at all. Families abandoned their homes, sending the young and able-bodied to distant cities. The official stance echoed across the region. No technology, no intervention, no budget could bring back what the land had lost. Restoration was not just unlikely, it was deemed impossible. In government meetings, the word irreversible appeared again and again. Hydrologists pointed to decades of overuse and drought. They cited data showing water tables dropping meter by meter, season after season. Satellite maps showed the riverbed as a thin scar of dust winding through barren fields. Policy memos warned of permanent ecological collapse. The only solutions offered were temporary: more tankers, deeper bore wells, or distant promises of large-scale infrastructure that never materialized. Villagers heard these conclusions repeated in every official visit. Experts arrived with clipboards and left with resignation. The message was unmistakable: the Arvari was finished, its aquifer exhausted, its people left to adapt or disappear. For the state, the file was closed. For the engineers, the river was a relic of the past. No one in authority expected water to return, let alone life. In village after village, the cost of a vanished river became a daily reality. Fields that once grew wheat and mustard now stood barren, cracked by sun and drought. Cattle wandered through dust, searching for water that no longer existed. The young, faced with empty wells and empty promises, packed their belongings and boarded trains to Delhi or Jaipur. In some hamlets, more than half the families left within a decade. Schoolyards grew silent as children followed their parents to distant cities, leaving only the elderly behind to watch over abandoned homes and untended land. Gopal Singh, one of the oldest residents of Hamirpur, remembered the change with a quiet ache. No water, no food, no fodder. Nothing is in the village, he said. Only the old people living, sick because of malnutrition. Night blindness became common among children as diets shrank to little more than dry millet. The village temple, once the center of festivals, became a place for quiet prayers for rain that never came. Farms collapsed one by one. With each failed harvest, another family left, some selling their land for a fraction of its worth. Those who stayed survived on government rations and the hope that tankers would arrive before the next heat wave. The riverbed, a scar of dust winding for miles, became a symbol of loss. People stopped telling stories about the days when water ran clear and deep. Even the names of certain wells faded from memory, erased by years of neglect. By the early 1980s, the population of some villages had dropped by a third. The few who remained gathered each evening to share news of relatives working as laborers in distant factories. The sense of community, once built around shared harvests and water festivals, now centered on endurance and waiting. For many, the future held only two choices: leave or survive on hope. The river's absence was not just a physical loss, it was the unraveling of a way of life, felt in every empty house and every silent field. In the spring of 1985, hope arrived in Gopalpura as a stranger with a notebook. Rajendra Singh, a young Ayurvedic doctor, had left his government job and wandered into Alwar district searching for a way to serve. What he found was a village nearly emptied by drought, wells dry, fields abandoned, elders surviving on government rations. Singh listened as a village elder, Ramkaran, described how the land once held water. He pointed to the stunted trees and explained the difference between rocks that held rain and those that let it run away. The lesson was simple: the earth could heal itself if people worked with it. Guided by these words, Singh and a handful of villagers began to dig. They had no machinery, no government funds, and little more than their own hands. The design they chose was ancient, a johad, a crescent-shaped earthen dam built from local soil and stone. For centuries, these structures had captured monsoon rains, letting water seep slowly into the ground. But decades of neglect and official skepticism had left the knowledge nearly lost. Now, it was being revived one shovel at a time. Construction was slow and met with ridicule. Some called Singh foolish. Others doubted that a pile of earth could do what government tankers and deep bore wells could not. Still, the volunteers pressed on, shaping the embankment to follow the natural curve of the slope, packing the earth by foot and hand. The johad's walls rose over several weeks, fed by sweat and stubbornness. Women carried baskets of soil, children fetched stones from the riverbed, and elders offered advice drawn from memory. When the first monsoon arrived, rainwater pooled behind the new johad. For the first time in years, water lingered in the landscape rather than vanishing in a rush. Over the next months, something remarkable happened. Wells downstream began to fill. A trickle appeared in a spring, long thought lost. Farmers who had watched their land crack and crumble now saw damp earth and the promise of a crop. The success of Gopalpuras. Johad did not go unnoticed. Word spread to neighboring villages. There was water where none had been. The lesson was clear. With local knowledge, community labor, and a willingness to trust tradition, even a river written off as dead could begin to stir. Rajendra Singh's experiment had become proof. One johad, built by hand in 1985, planted the seed for a movement that would soon sweep across 72 villages, challenging everything the experts had declared impossible. Across the parched expanse of the Arvari Basin, the success of a single johad in Gopalpura set off a wave of action that would soon stretch far beyond one village. Word traveled quickly: there was water where none had been. Neighboring hamlets sent delegations to see the earthen dam that had captured the monsoon and coaxed a trickle of life from the dust. What began as a local experiment soon became a coordinated campaign, as villagers from across the watershed gathered to share knowledge, tools, and labor. Within a decade, the landscape was transformed by human hands. 72 villages, once resigned to tanker deliveries and empty wells, joined forces to restore their land. The effort was vast but deeply personal. Every johad built means a new hope for a family, a chance for a field to yield again, a reason for a migrant to return home. There was no central contractor, no government blueprint. Instead, each village chose sites based on generations of observation, where rainwater pooled, where soil held moisture, where ancient trees stood as silent witnesses to forgotten springs. By the mid-1990s, the network had grown to more than 375 johads, joined by 27 additional conservation works, small check dams, percolation tanks, and stone bunds, woven across 492 square kilometers of watershed. The scale was staggering. From the ridges of the Aravalli Hills to the lowest fields, a patchwork of earthen embankments now slowed the monsoon's rush, letting water soak into the fractured rock below. Some johads were modest, built by a handful of families with nothing but shovels and baskets. Others were larger, requiring dozens of villagers to move earth and stone for weeks on end. Coordination happened not through official decrees, but in the shade of banyan trees and village courtyards. Elders recalled the old ways, guiding the placement of each new structure. Women organized labor and meals, children carried stones, and local masons lent their skill to ensure each johad would withstand the next flood. The work was relentless, stretching from the first pre-monsoon heat to the final days of the rains. Yet the spirit of cooperation grew stronger with each completed dam. Villages that once competed for scarce water now traded advice and celebrated each other's success. This was not a project imposed from above. It was a movement built from the ground up, measured not in rupees spent, but in hands calloused and hopes restored. In less than 10 years, a region written off as beyond saving had become a living network of water harvesters. The numbers tell only part of the story. 375 johads, 27 other works, 72 villages, 492 square kilometers. The true achievement was collective, a basin-wide alliance, united by the belief that tradition and community could do what no outside expert had imagined possible. In the years after the first johads took shape, the most convincing evidence of change came from beneath the ground. Teams of villagers, guided by hydrologists from Taran Bharat Sang, began the patient task of measuring water levels in hundreds of wells scattered across the Arvari watershed. Each well was checked with a rope and weight, marked before and after the monsoon, year after year. The results were impossible to ignore. Water tables that had sunk beyond the reach of any pump began to rise, first by a meter or two, then by 6, 10, even 15 meters in some places. In wells that had been dry for decades, water returned to the surface. Farmers who had given up on irrigation found their fields green again. Springs that had vanished in memory began to flow, and old stone stepwells once used for festivals filled to their brims. The scale of recovery was clear in the numbers. Across 72 villages and nearly 500 square kilometers, the average water table rose by 6 to 15 meters. This was not a single lucky well or a fluke of the weather. The pattern repeated itself from village to village, each one downstream of a johad or check dam. Researchers from independent institutes visited the area, confirming the findings with their own instruments. They tracked the rise through field measurements and later satellite data showing a burst of new vegetation across the basin. For the first time in living memory, the aquifer had not only stabilized but begun to recharge. The science was simple and visible. Rainwater, once lost to runoff, now lingered in the earth, feeding wells, springs, and soon something much larger. July 1995 brought a night that villagers would remember for generations. As the monsoon rains swept across the Aravalli hills, farmers in Gopalpura noticed something strange. Water, clear and steady, moving in the old riverbed. It wasn't a puddle or a brief surge from a storm. This was a flow, continuous, gathering strength, spreading along the dry channel that had been little more than a scar for 60 years. Word traveled fast. By sunrise, men, women, and children from dozens of villages followed the current's path, some on foot, others by bicycle or motorbike, tracing the miracle as it unfolded. The river didn't stop at the first bend or disappear into the sand. It ran the full 45 kilometers, touching every hamlet that had once watched it fade away. Elders wept openly, recalling stories their parents had told of water so abundant that fields needed no irrigation. Children splashed in pools, many for the first time in their lives. All-night celebrations broke out, drums, singing, food shared between families who had once competed for every drop. For the people of the Arvari Basin, this was more than water. It was the return of a lost member of the community, a living presence that had shaped their ancestors' lives. Witnesses spoke of the river's sound echoing through the valley, of wells refilling overnight, of springs bubbling up in places long forgotten. The impossible had happened, not through outside intervention, but through the work of those who depended on the river most. The land itself seemed to breathe again. After 6 decades of silence, the Arvari flowed year-round. The miracle was undeniable, and with it came a new responsibility: to ensure that this revival would last. 1998, the villages of the Arvari Basin faced a new challenge. With water flowing once more, questions of ownership and use became urgent. The state government, seeing a revived river, began selling fishing rights to outside contractors. Local leaders, including Meena Kumar from Hamirpur, saw the risk. If outsiders controlled the river, the hard-won gains could vanish. The response was swift. Representatives from all 72 villages gathered and formed the Arvari River Parliament, a body with no government mandate but total community backing. Each village chose its own delegates, ensuring that every perspective, farmers, herders, women, the landless, had a voice. The parliament met under trees and in courtyards, debating rules for water use, fishing, and even the crops that could be grown. Decisions were made by consensus, not by vote, and recorded in a simple charter. Enforcement relied on social trust. If someone broke a rule, the community itself intervened. There were no police, no fines from above, just the quiet pressure of neighbors and the knowledge that the river's future depended on everyone's restraint. The parliament soon became the region's most trusted institution, setting a framework for stewardship that protected the river from both overuse and outside exploitation. 2 decades after the Arvari River returned, life in the watershed tells a different story than the one written in government files. Where once only the oldest villages remained, families have come home. Children who left for city work now plant wheat and mustard in fields that hold water year-round. The number of annual crop cycles has doubled, sometimes even tripled. Villages that survived on handouts now hire laborers from outside during the harvest. New wells support vegetable gardens, and livestock herds have grown back to sizes not seen in living memory. The temperature in the region has dropped by 2 degrees Celsius, a small but welcome relief in the desert heat. The Arvari's success has not stayed confined to its banks. More than 1,000 villages across Rajasthan have adopted the same approach, reviving 7 rivers with similar methods. The model has traveled as far as Gujarat and West Bengal, where communities facing drought studied the johads system and built their own networks of rainwater harvesting. Even in places where the soil and politics are different, the core lesson endures. When communities take charge, the land and water respond. The Arvari now flows through a landscape where the exodus has reversed, where the return of water has meant the return of people, livelihoods, and hope. The river's revival is not just a memory, it is a living legacy, renewed each season by the hands and decisions of those who depend on it. Today, the Arvari River still flows, governed not by decree, but by the hands and votes of its own people. As water crises now threaten 1 in 4 people globally, Rajasthan's 375 johads prove that collective action and traditional knowledge can restore the impossible. The power to revive or exhaust our watersheds sits with those who depend on them most. The question is, who will choose to act?